Hello, everyone. This is Wes Henson, and welcome to this week's On the Go podcast. And on this podcast, we review and summarize the Bible Studies for Life series weekly lesson. Please take a few moments and look in the show notes and also in the description for links to this week's 2-page printed summary and also a bonus handout. I want to thank you for joining me today for this week's small group Bible study for the week of June the 9th, 2024. Now, if you're new here, please do me a great big favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button, ring the bell, and then that way you will not miss our next episode. Okay, let's begin this week's On the Go Bible study. So our 6-week study is entitled Promises We Can Count On. And we began last week with the lesson, God's Promise of Fruitfulness. God called humanity to rule over his whole creation. And our focus was found in Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Today we move on to Genesis chapter 9, and this week's study is titled God's Promise of Preservation. Now, the book of Genesis records how God judged the world through a great flood. But through Noah and his extended family, God preserved his creation and began anew. God's instruction to Noah reinforces for us God's continued care for his creation. And our study today is going to reveal 3 things. Number 1, how God reaffirmed his covenant with humanity. Number 2, God affirmed the value of all human life. And number 3, God promised to preserve his creation. In fact, that's the big idea of our lesson this week. That's the point of our study today. God promised to preserve his creation. Okay, let's get started in Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to begin reading in verses 1, 2, and 3. I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and terror of you will be in every living creature on earth, every kind of bird of the sky, every creature that crawls on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. They are placed under your authority. Every creature that lives and moves will be food for you. As I gave the green plants, I have given you everything." So if you remember in Genesis 1 and 2, those 2 chapters highlight how God created the world, how he commissioned humans to rule over all of his creation, and that we were bearers of God's image. And very quickly, sin marred God's image that is within us. But God's purpose for humanity to steward the creation remained. As we look in Genesis chapter 6 through 8, those chapters record the tragedy that came when humanity became so sinful that God determined to destroy the world through a great flood. Following the flood, this is where we're picking up this week. Following the flood, Noah offered a sacrifice of gratitude to God for providing safety, and God accepted Noah's sacrifice, and God declared that he would never again destroy the earth, the whole earth, by flood as he had just done. So in chapter 9, we come to, and in this chapter, God restates his call to humanity through Noah and his descendants to be fruitful and multiply. And you'll notice as I read those verses that the language, much of the language in verses 1 through 3 is very similar to what we find in Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 through 30. But one of the most significant differences between the covenant that God made with Adam and the covenant that he makes with Noah is that after placing all the animal life under Noah's authority, or humanity's authority, God told Noah that the animals would be a source of food for him. Humankind would still be superior to all of life, but rather than living in harmony with the animals, they would dwell together in dread and in fear. So rather than being invited to the table, they were subject to being on the table, if you will. And the fear instilled in these animals would also serve as a safeguard for them, as they would shy away from human beings with whom they shared the land. So these verses 1 through 3, they reveal to us, number one, that sin is powerful in its effect on life, but God is greater. Number two, whereas God could have given up on humankind because of their rebelliousness, we see here that God did not. Instead, God chose to make a fresh start. Number three, God redeems the faithful by grace, like Noah, and sets them on a path of purpose that he himself has designed. And number four, humankind has a responsibility to replenish the earth, both in the sense of procreation and also preservation. So in these verses, God reaffirmed his covenant with Adam. And in these next verses 4 through 7, we're going to see that God affirms the value of human life. Let's begin, verse 4. However, the Lord says, you must not eat meat with its lifeblood in it, and I will require a penalty for your lifeblood. I will require it from any animal and from any human. If someone murders a fellow human, I will require that person's life. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans his blood will be shed. For God made humans in his image. But you be fruitful and multiply, spread out or disperse over the earth and multiply on it. So part of the care assigned to humankind for the earth and living things is to respect them as part of God's creation. So they were, the Lord says, they were to drain the blood before eating the flesh of the animals. Well, why is that? What is the reason? Well, in Leviticus 17, verse 11, we see that the life was in the blood. So this wasn't part of the Hebrew culture, but other cultures, other ancient cultures were known to drink blood, the blood of the gods, the blood of animals, in order to increase their vitality or to invigorate their life and make them become like the gods. Some of you may remember several years ago, Charlie Sheen, when he had his, I don't know what you call it, his altercation with his bosses on his TV program. One of the things that he did, was he was pretty much out on the edge of things. He was quoted as, and said himself, that he would drink the blood of lions that would make him stronger and greater, a greater person. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So, because from God's perspective, blood was to be treated with respect because life originates and belongs to the Lord. It is not something which human beings are to trivialize or trifle over. Life is precious. All of life is precious. Every person is due respect as having been created in the image of God, as marred as that image might be. So extreme caution is required in how we treat every life, even the life of a murderous tyrant. Taking a person's life, even as legal punishment, needs to be handled with an attitude of sacredness, with sorrow rather than delight. And also here, by implication in verse 6, where the Lord says that one who takes a human life, their life will be taken from them by other humans. The implication is that carrying out this command of taking another human life is an action of society. It's not an action of an individual or any vigilante action. And furthermore, there is no place for revengeful or retaliatory killing by one individual on another. So no matter how much we may feel inclined to do so, the Lord has put limits on what we are to do. So these verses 4 through 7, reveal to us that life is sacred and it is to be treated as such in all of our relationships with other people. Also, God holds us accountable for how we treat others, especially at the point of taking another person's life. And then we also see here in these verses that from the very beginning, the Lord has urged us to favor life and to promote life and to protect life. All right, in the next verses 8 through 13, we're going to see that God promises to preserve humanity and his creation. Verse 8. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand that I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you. And let me stop right here and encourage you to look in the show notes and in the descriptions for the link to the covenants, the different covenants that we'll be looking at over the time that we have this study, and the covenants that God has made with us over the years. I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you. Verse 10, and with every living creature that is with you, birds, livestock, and all wildlife of the earth that are with you, all the animals of the earth that came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again will every creature be wiped out by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all future generations. I have placed my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Now notice that this covenant is not just with humanity, but it is with all of God's creation. God promises to preserve his creation and is involved in a covenant between God, Noah, and Noah's descendants, and that includes us. The language here stresses that God's personal initiative in the covenant, that God initiated the covenant. It began with him, and the people responded to what God had begun. God established the rainbow as a sign of his covenant with creation, his contract, his promise with his creation. And the sign provided a very visible reminder of God's promise never to destroy the earth again by flood. And when people saw a rainbow, they would remember God's promise and they would take courage over that. So these verses reveal that the promises God makes can be counted on as sure and certain. And also God, the one who created life, commits himself to preserving and sustaining life as well. Okay, that's our lesson for this week. But before we go, let me share just 3 applications to what we've studied. And I invite you to choose one to pick up this week and to put into practice in your life. Application number 1, consider your responsibility to God's creation. God has promised to preserve his creation. And so you can make a list of specific actions that you can take to demonstrate your responsibility as a steward, because that's what we are. We are a steward. We are responsible for managing God's creation. What can we do? What is our responsibility to preserve life? Number 2, affirm the value of human life. Today's world often manifests a low view of human life. So you can choose specific ways that you can work to value human life. What can you do to show that all of human life is precious and valuable? And then number 3, participate in ministries of compassion. God promised never to destroy the world with a flood again, but natural disasters such as, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, droughts, and other things, they still occur. They still happen. So you might consider how God could use you and others in your church or your community as messengers of kindness and comfort to those who are in need. Okay, let's wrap everything up for this week this way. We can participate in God's unconditional covenant to preserve creation by striving to preserve human life. Remember, every human being bears the image of God, and therefore every human being is valuable. Okay, let's remember to check out all of the links for this study, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.